Hey everyone, Conrad here. In today's Well Aware Operations Teardown, I'm going to go through a particular micro focus on Google Calendar that I'm really excited to share about with you. Specifically, I want to talk about how I use colors to codify the different types of blocks of times that I might be involved with, and how that comes to make sense for me in my day-to-day business operations. Let's dive in. So, in this particular test calendar that I've created, I've put together a bunch of just fake calendar blocks to give you ideas of the different types of meetings that I tend to have. And I'm going to walk you through how I've gone about color coding each of these so that you can get a sense of how, if you were to decide on a color code system for your calendar, how you might go about deciding both color preferences as well as just to get a different idea of the different types of categories of time that show up in your day. For the purpose of making it easier to see all the different blocks I have put together, I did turn off this one setting that I normally have on, which is the setting that makes past events showcase like a lighter shade. I'm going to actually turn that back on at the end of this so you can see what that looks like, because I think that's going to impact a bit of your experience when you're looking at your calendar visually. But let's dive into the meat of this. So, as you can see here, every day at 9 o'clock, I have this executive assistance meeting. It's a time block that I've dedicated to, just sitting down and kind of going through the internal operations of like what things I need to do / delegate to my team. Let's just say, for all intents and purposes, that I've decided this lavender color right here is going to reflect any time in my business in which I'm working on the business or maybe in the business, but mostly internally, right? I'm looking inward. I'm not necessarily serving a client. I'm not necessarily speculating a new business opportunity. I'm just working on internal operations, kind of keeping things running. That is how I've decided to use this particular calendar block. Notice how the internal business task block, let's say I'm working on, putting together a particular system within my company so that my company can operate more effectively. That could be a reflection of the lavender calendar block code. Let's say I'm performing an end of week review where I'm looking at everything that I've done throughout the day. Internal operations, I give it the lavender color. What about, let's say, a more obvious thing that's going to show up in most of our time blocks, like potentially speculating a new partnership relationship or even potentially having a prospect call? I put this in pink. I can't tell you why, other than the fact that I think it's just a nice color to showcase. And so in this case, Google has given us this apt little flamingo color specifically, rather than just what we might call conventional pink. Can't say why Google has decided these particular color choices, but I think they're a bit entertaining to kind of read through all of them. Please note that inside of the test calendar function that I have right here, you actually have a larger choice of color palette. In fact, you can even create a custom color for your particular calendar. I chose to leave the sort of generic non-color assigned, or like the default color of any block in here, in red. You can actually particularly tell on the left-hand side here, it's very faint, that there is a red association here. If I went ahead and changed this color to, let's say, birch or graphite, you would see how this particular block changes, right? That's that sort of very left-hand side. But something to note when you're managing multiple calendars at the same time and you have them all turned on and you're using color codes across each of them. Some people may take this entire color code legend system and say, hey, you know what? Rather than have one calendar that reflects, that has all these different colors associated with each block, I'm going to have several calendars that are like. I will advise against that, just because it breeds challenges with certain tools like your Calendly and cal.coms of the world, where you're trying to actually incorporate scheduling systems into one specific calendar. You don't want to have that system read a bunch of different calendars. That's not how you want to go about color legending. That's not how you want to go about creating a color legend for your time blocks. Moving on. Let's go ahead and think of service calls as this sort of light green or sage kind of color that we have going on here. So I chose sage because to me it represents the color of money. It's very obvious that when I have a lot of time blocks in which I'm providing a service to a client, and I'm getting paid for it, then I can make that sort of quick association of blocks of time on my calendar and the fact that I should be getting paid for that time. Cool, great. In a similar note, but almost on a different twist, if I'm sort of focusing on studying something new, or if I'm attending a webinar for educational purposes, personal professional development, I might put the more forest, I believe it's called, or basil green within the Google Calendar system, because to me, that's sort of, I guess, enriching my ability to focus on more revenue generating activities. I don't know. I just thought that was a nice ode to the color. I may do a similar vision for a specific advisor call, which I actually don't have here in this example of test calendars. But on the topic of advisors, I actually have a very particular approach to people who provide to my company. I have two different types of colors that I'll use. I'm going to use the light blue or the peacock color to represent someone who is actively servicing my business, someone whom I pay. I have a relationship in which I pay them money for their time. And so time blocks that show up on my calendar to reflect those relationships, I'm going to put that in a light blue. Whereas if I'm only potentially exploring these types of relationships where I'm in the sort of speculation phase, but not as a potential seller, but rather as a potential buyer, I'm actually going to use the blueberry or darker blue version of that. And that's just kind of my way of making that association. So in that respect, I can capture, hey, how many times am I spending in meetings exploring as a speculative buyer of some sorts, whether it's for one particular person who's prospecting me or several. I can see each of those individual associations of time on my calendar via this one specific color. Let's switch over to something that I think to be very simple and straightforward in terms of color. Travel, I always put in yellow. It always reminds me of the taxi. So if I'm ever trying to account for time in a business setting in which I need to travel somewhere, I'll very easily go ahead and just mark that time in yellow, and that will make me recognize first and foremost that, hey, that's transit time. That's how I'm going to be spent in a car, on a train, on a plane, or on a bike, or even just walking. And so that to me just is very straightforward. It's just a very simple color association of like taxi, transportation, that yellowish color. I think that's spot on here. And let's see exactly what that color is called here. Banana, of course. Let's say I'm attending a actual business partner meeting. Well, for me, this is where things kind of get interesting. Like I might say that a partnership meeting is a collaboration. Typically when I work with partners, I'm working with them almost like in a marketing kind of capacity where it's like we're co-creating something or we're discussing referral partner relationships that have been made or referred clients or referred providers. And so we're having that kind of discussion around those parties or about just our internal, I mean, it depends on how you want to look at it. But in the event that I'm looking at this partnership meeting from a collaboration on content standpoint, I might mark that in orange because, well, that's my color scheme for creating marketing content or for recording a podcast episode, right? Let's say that's my color system for marketing as a whole. Whereas again, pink is sales, light green is service delivery, light blue is service delivery, but on the other end, dark blue is speculating service delivery, but on the other end. So again, that's kind of where this sort of logic comes in. Purple is not necessarily, I try to make an association between purple and pink here, where it's like purple is my networking events. Purple is my catching up with relationships and building relationships. It may not necessarily mean that those relationships are being speculated upon, but I do like to think sometimes that when I'm at a networking group meeting, I'm kind of speculating, but I can't tell. Maybe I'm speculating as a provider, maybe I'm speculating as a client. And in those respects, to me, purple kind of has this beautiful go in between of like where pink and dark blue kind of exist. Don't fight me on the color system scheme of things of like where my legend may be right or wrong. This is the framework I came up with, okay? I like to think my palette tastes are okay. And then finally, in addition to all the different color choices that we have, there is one that I found very useful as a sort of null system, which is graphite. So regardless of what I'm doing with a particular block that shows up on my time, and forgive me for jumping all over the place here, this is a bit unscripted, but if you haven't already noticed, the new meetings that just come up onto my calendar that I haven't necessarily looked at or accounted for. Again, this is sort of why I chose this default red or tomato color. It's to help me very quickly recognize that there is a new meeting on my calendar that I have not yet sort of color coded. And in my case, part of the process of color coding a calendar block is to recognize that I have accounted for it, that I've paid attention to it, and that I'm addressing that I'm going to probably be there for that, right? Like I'm kind of readying myself that I'm going to attend that event. This is something I do at the start of every week. In fact, I even try not to color code recurring events each week because I want to actually make note of the fact that even if it's going to show up on my calendar nearly indefinitely or for a very long time, I still want to check in every week with the events that are going to be particularly mindful for me. So like, for instance, with this executive assistance meeting, if I change the color here to graphite, I have the choice to change just this event, all events, or this event and the following ones thereafter. I actually think it's nice when you mind that you're going to not change the events from the past, meaning you're not going to go ahead and modify all events from history. Because to me, a good calendar system is maintained almost like a bookkeeping ledger. You don't want to change the transactions of time that you've had in the past. You want to keep that history and have that almost like an accounting thing that you reconcile with at the end. So you don't want your books to, suddenly miss records that used to be there. Now, with that being said, let's just say I had to cancel the next 3 morning executive assistance meetings. Let's say my client canceled this meeting last minute with me from 10:30 to 11 on Thursday. Let's say I deserted this meeting that I had actually put on my calendar on the 31st on Wednesday. The reason I use graphite is to signify that that is something that was on my calendar, that was something that I was going to attend to, but for some reason that event is no longer occurring. So one thing you'll find from me in particular is if I end up having to cancel a meeting with you, or you happen to have to cancel a meeting with me, I'm going to fight to keep that calendar block on our schedule, but I'm going to particularly mark it on my side in this graphite color to remind me that, hey, this did not actually happen. And yeah, if I need to, I can go take that extra step and edit this particular event and say, hey, I'm actually free during this time now. So if I needed to make myself available for that block of time and I needed my calendar tool to recognize that, then I could go ahead and mark myself free from this particular time obligation that's sitting on my calendar. But my point is, I still get to keep that as part of my ledger so that whether it's days, weeks, or months from now, I can look back on this particular week and go, hey, I actually didn't attend that meeting, but I planned to, or something went wrong. And there's maybe more detail that I can get into from there, depending on how I'm keeping my records. But with that being said, you now know how I go about using my color coding system within Google Calendar in order to give myself a very quick, high-level, visual, colorful sense of what's going on throughout my days and weeks. I think this is, again, a system that I've put together based on my own interpretation of what colors mean to me and what colors are frankly just available within Google Calendar. I'm aware that for the Outlook users out there, you guys actually have different color choices, and I think that's very interesting. Needless to say, I can't say much about Apple Calendar users. I don't know exactly what your situation is. I live primarily on PC, and for that reason, even when I'm on a Mac laptop, which I do have on my occasions when I'm out and about, I will use Google Calendar as my system and framework because I live within the G Suite workspace. But again, my point is, if you have a desire to see your calendar with a little bit more color and vibrance, especially if you want to get a better high overview of like what are the different types of time that you're investing in and sort of where is the bigger picture things going. I think it's very helpful to be able to recognize very, very quickly like how many client meetings you have, how many prospect meetings you have, how many prospect meetings you have in which you yourself are the prospect, like you're the one who's doing the buying. I think that's just as interesting. Marketing operations, whether that's through partnerships or what have you, recognizing internal operation time and you working on/in the business in that particular capacity, additional study and professional development, traveling out and about, all of these things. If you can block out all that time, and if you can have a good system for recognizing when new blocks of time are suddenly showing up since when you last revisited your calendar to kind of take a look at where things are going. Again, I love this system, this micro operation, if you will, of using colors to help me understand where my time is going. And with that, thank you for listening. Look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for checking out this teardown.